Only 20% of Australia's most advanced renewable energy developments have experienced delays in the past year, according to new analysis by the Weekend Australian. Now, this follows a deal struck by the New South Wales government this week to keep Australia's largest coal-fired power station open for at least 2 more years in a bid to avoid a shortfall in supply. Now, for more on this, I'm joined by energy advisor Stephen Wilson, who's an adjunct professor at the University of Queensland. Professor, thank you for joining me. How would you describe the progress of Australia's renewable energy rollout?
Yeah, good morning. Good to be talking to you. Look, there are clearly delays in the process of the renewable energy rollout. These things do take time, and as the projects get bigger and bigger, and as they cover more and more land, and as they affect more and more communities, we're seeing resistance. And so, but I think it's important to note here that the speed of the rollout is not the only issue. That's not the only reason that we're seeing problems in the system.
What are some of the other issues?
Well, the big question is, can you really run the whole power system predominantly on wind and solar and some storage? And the view that I've come to is that that's going to be impossible. It's very, very difficult, probably impossible, and trying to achieve it will be extremely expensive. We're seeing that the environmental impacts through land use get larger and larger as you push the share of renewables higher and higher. And then there's no guarantee that the system will work with anything like the kind of reliability that Australian households and businesses have come to expect, and that any modern society needs, quite frankly, to function properly.
Just this week, the New South Wales Premier said he didn't have a choice but to extend the life of the Eraring coal-fired power plant in order to prevent blackouts in the years ahead. Was this the only solution?
Yeah, I think so, given the situation. I think the IPA wrote a paper a little while ago calling the closure and removal of Liddell Power Station the line in the sand. And so that we can't just close Eraring and the next power station and the next power station. So I think that realisation has dawned in the New South Wales government that if you remove these large assets, you are going to have problems.
Now, we know the coalition's under pressure to reveal the details of its nuclear energy policy, including where it would build nuclear power plants if elected. Now, you've obviously done extensive research on nuclear power. Would you be okay with a nuclear plant being built in your neighbourhood?
Yeah, I'd be perfectly fine with a nuclear plant, to live near a nuclear plant. Modern nuclear power plants are very safe. And what we find is when you look around the world, the closer you are to an actual real nuclear power plant, the more support there is for the community for that nuclear power plant. And we see that actually with the Opal research reactor in Sydney. The people that are in the community living close to these assets are quite comfortable with them.
A new report by CSIRO this week has found it would cost $8.5 billion to build a large-scale nuclear power plant in Australia, and it claimed it would produce electricity at roughly twice the cost of renewable sources. How does that compare with your research?
Yeah, our research finds the opposite, actually, which is that when you step back from the level of the individual technology and you look at the whole system, what we find is that going from the system we had previously that we inherited from our parents' generation to the system we've got now, which has got an increased share of renewables and an increasing reliance on gas, that's roughly doubled the cost of wholesale electricity, and it's driven prices up, and they're continuing to be driven up. But if you step back and you say, what's the optimum system if we remove the ban and allow nuclear energy, we find that that is actually much cheaper than trying to remove all the CO2 emissions from the system just with wind and solar power.
And we're also hearing different timeframes for what's realistic around setting up nuclear energy. That particular report I referred to claimed it would take 15 years. What do you think is a realistic timeline?
Well, I think that the way that this debate is being conducted is not quite right. So the people who are opposed, many people who are opposed to nuclear energy won't actually admit that they're outright opposed to it. So they pretend it's about cost and they pretend it's about time. But a lot of those people actually, they want it to cost too much and they want it to take too long. And they don't want us to start now. So they want us to procrastinate and then they want things to go very slowly. What I'm saying is, actually, if we take a systematic approach, we should be preparing ourselves now, not delaying. We need to do the prep work now so that if we need it, which I believe we will, but let's say if we need it, we'll be in a position to deploy it. And so that prep work will take time. But I think what's becoming really clear now, they say it takes too long and costs too much to do nuclear. Well, the question is compared with what? So that the official plan that is being promoted now very clearly is going to take a very long time itself and is going to cost an awful lot, as I've said. So when you stand back and you do that comparison, you get a completely different picture. So that's what I call the power system paradox, which is that the power, and we see this in the Eraring decision. So the power system needs assets, which the owners of those assets are struggling to justify because they're being put under pressure by the part-time output of wind and solar plants. And so that's why we're seeing decisions like the decision of the New South Wales government, which is the right decision under the circumstances, making special payments to these assets to keep them in the market for the time being. What we need is a sensible approach where we step back, we remove the bans on nuclear energy, we start to do the preparation and put ourselves in a position to deploy in a timely manner without panicking and without rushing.
Certainly a long way to go with this debate. Thank you so much for your time, Professor Stephen Wilson there.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.